The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door wearing a name tag. No, it seeps in slowly, like water damage behind a wall, until one day you're standing in your own garage, staring at your husband's face, and you realize the whole foundation of your life has been rotting for years. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. 3 months earlier, I was still pretending everything was fine. I was still the woman who brought homemade cookies to the neighborhood block party, who smiled and waved at Linda next door every morning, who believed my husband Mark when he said he was working late again. I was still that person who didn't know that the woman accusing me of sleeping with her husband was actually sleeping with mine. In our bathtub. My bathtub. The one with the chipped tile I'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. But I didn't know that yet. Back then, I was just confused, hurt, wondering why my neighbor of 15 years suddenly wouldn't look me in the eye at the mailbox. We lived in Phoenix, in one of those sprawling suburban neighborhoods where everyone's house looks almost exactly the same except for the color of the shutters and whether you have a cactus garden or tried to maintain an actual lawn in the desert heat. Mark and I had bought our house in 2005, right before everything went to hell with the economy, but we'd held on, paid it off early even. I was proud of that. Proud of us. The neighborhood had this rhythm to it, you know? Every morning at 7, Mrs. Chen would walk her ancient Pomeranian past my window. By 8, the Garcia kids would be waiting for the school bus on the corner, backpacks almost as big as they were. At 6 p.m., garage doors would start opening like dominoes, releasing husbands from their cars, briefcases in hand, ties loosened. It was choreographed, predictable, safe. Or so I thought. Linda and her husband Tom had moved in next door about 5 years ago. She was one of those women who always looked put together, even when she was taking out the trash. Perfect blonde highlights, perfect yoga body, perfect smile that never quite reached her eyes. I should have noticed that earlier, the smile thing. When they first moved in, I'd been the welcoming neighbor. I brought over a casserole that first week, offered to show Linda around the neighborhood, introduced her to the other wives. She'd seemed friendly enough then, grateful even. We'd had coffee a few times, talked about the challenges of maintaining a house in the desert, complained about HOA fees and water bills. I remembered one particular afternoon, maybe 6 months after they'd moved in. We were sitting on her back patio, drinking iced tea, and she'd asked me about my marriage. "You and Mark seem so solid," she'd said, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. "How long have you been together?" 23 years in September, I'd told her, pride evident in my voice. We met in college. He was in engineering. I was studying art. Complete opposites, but it worked. "That's beautiful," she'd said, but there was something in her tone I couldn't quite place, not envy exactly, something sharper. "Tom and I have only been married 8 years. Sometimes I wonder if we rushed into it." I should have heard the warning bell in that statement, should have recognized it as the opening salvo of someone looking for permission to blow up her marriage. But I'd just smiled sympathetically and said something bland about all marriages having rough patches. God, I was naive. The first time she accused me of having an affair with Tom, I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I didn't know how else to react. We were both standing in her driveway, me holding a plate of brownies I'd made because I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that it was her birthday, and her standing there with her arms crossed, blocking her front door like I was about to storm the castle. "I know what you've been doing," she said. Her voice was low, controlled, but there was something brittle underneath it, something that sounded like rage wrapped in ice. I remember the desert sun beating down on us, the smell of hot asphalt, the distant sound of someone's lawn sprinkler, even though it was the middle of the day when you're not supposed to water. Everything felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life by mistake. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, genuinely confused. The brownies were getting heavy in my hands, the plate warming in the heat. "Don't play dumb with me. I've seen the way you look at him, the way you're always outside when he gets home from work." I looked down at the brownies in my hands, then back at her face. Her jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles working beneath her skin. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept. "Linda, I brought you birthday brownies. I don't even know what you're talking about." "The hell you don't," she hissed, stepping closer. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, that expensive French stuff she wore. Close enough that I took an involuntary step backward. "I've seen you watching him. Timing your little trips to get the mail so you can accidentally run into him. Wearing those tight yoga pants when you know he's going to be outside washing his car." The accusations kept coming, each one more bizarre than the last. I wasn't even sure what to address first. The idea that my old faded yoga pants were somehow seductive attire. The suggestion that I was orchestrating elaborate mail collection schemes. It was so ridiculous it would have been funny if she hadn't looked so convinced. "Keep him away from you," she said finally, and then she went inside and shut the door in my face. Not a slam, which somehow made it worse. Just a firm, decisive closing, like she'd made her point and the conversation was over. I stood there for probably a full minute, holding those stupid brownies, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sun was baking the top of my head. A bead of sweat ran down my spine. Somewhere down the street, someone was mowing their lawn, the sound distant and ordinary, while my world tilted on its axis. Tom was a nice enough guy, I guess, but I'd never thought about him as anything other than the man who lived next door and sometimes helped Mark move furniture. He was bland, honestly. Thinning hair, slight paunch, the kind of guy who wore cargo shorts year-round and talked too much about his golf handicap. The idea that I'd been throwing myself at him was so ridiculous, I almost went back and knocked on the door to tell her she had it backwards, that she should check her facts, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the way she'd said it, like she was absolutely certain, like she knew something I didn't, like she needed me to be the villain in whatever story she was telling herself. I walked back to my house and threw the brownies in the trash. The whole plate, ceramic and all. I couldn't look at them anymore. Couldn't stand the reminder of my own stupidity, thinking I could maintain a normal friendship with someone who apparently saw me as a threat. Mark was in the garage, like always. He spent more time in that garage than he did in our bedroom. I told myself it was because he was stressed about work, about getting older, about all the things men his age worry about when they realize they're not going to be young forever. The garage had become his kingdom over the years. He'd lined the walls with pegboards for his tools, installed overhead storage, even put in a small refrigerator that he kept stocked with beer. There was a workbench that he'd built himself, solid oak, where he supposedly worked on various projects. I couldn't remember the last time he'd actually completed one. I stood in the doorway that connected the garage to the kitchen, watching him pretend to organize his socket wrenches. He didn't look up. "Linda's acting weird," I said. "Mm-hmm." She accused me of having an affair with Tom. That got his attention. He looked up, his expression carefully neutral. Too neutral. That's crazy. Why would she think that? I don't know. She seems convinced. Said I've been watching him, timing my mail runs to see him. Mark snorted, went back to his sockets. She's probably just paranoid. You know how some women get. Like it was a universal female failing. This tendency toward irrational jealousy. Like it had nothing to do with actual evidence or legitimate concerns. "Don't you think it's strange, though?" I pressed. "We've been neighbors for years, and suddenly she's acting like I'm some kind of threat?" "People go through things," he said, not looking at me. "Maybe she and Tom are having problems. Maybe she's looking for someone to blame." God, I was stupid. But here's the thing, and I want you to really hear me on this because I know some of you are screaming at your screen right now, telling me I should have known, should have seen it. Love isn't blind. Love is paralyzed. It sees everything but can't move, can't act, can't even name what it's witnessing because naming it would mean the whole world has to change. And I wasn't ready for my world to change. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, Linda's behavior got stranger. She'd stare at me from her window, standing perfectly still behind the curtains like some character in a horror movie. I'd see the fabric move when I went to get the mail, see her silhouette watching me. It was unsettling in a way I couldn't quite articulate. She started a rumor at the homeowners association meeting that I'd been stealing packages from her porch, which was insane because I'd literally never touched anything of hers in my life. I found out about it from Janet, who lived 2 houses down. "I don't believe it, of course," Janet had said, but her eyes told a different story. There was doubt there, suspicion. But Linda was very convincing. She said she has video evidence. Video evidence of what? Me not stealing her packages? Janet had the grace to look uncomfortable. She said she's going to present it at the next meeting. Of course, at the next meeting, Linda conveniently couldn't get her laptop to work, and the video was never shown. But the damage was done. I could feel the other neighbors looking at me differently. Conversations stopping when I approached, invitations to book club, and wine nights mysteriously drying up. Other neighbors started looking at me funny. Margaret, who I'd been friends with for 10 years, suddenly couldn't maintain eye contact. Patricia stopped inviting me to her bunco nights. Even Mrs. Chen walked her dog on the other side of the street. Suddenly, I was the suspicious one, the troublemaker, the woman who couldn't be trusted. Mark listened to my complaints about it with half an ear while scrolling through his phone. I'd be talking, pouring my heart out about how isolated I felt, how hurt I was by the accusations, and I'd look over to see him thumbing through Instagram or checking his email. "Just ignore her," he said without looking up. "She's probably going through something." Going through something. That phrase became his answer for everything. Linda's going through something. Work's going through something. We're all just going through something, aren't we? "Mark, are you even listening to me?" "Of course I am. You're talking about Linda. Look, she's just a bored housewife with too much time on her hands. Don't give her the satisfaction of getting to you." But she was getting to me. That was the problem. Every day felt like walking through a minefield, wondering what accusation would come next, what rumor would spread, who else would start treating me like a pariah. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe I had looked at Tom wrong somehow. Maybe I'd been too friendly. Maybe I'd smiled too much or made too much eye contact, or somehow sent signals I didn't mean to send. I spiraled into this place where I started monitoring my own behavior, analyzing every interaction, wondering if I was the problem. I'd stand in front of the mirror some mornings, studying my face, trying to see what Linda saw. Was I threatening? Was there something about me that screamed, husband stealer? I started dressing more conservatively, stopped wearing makeup, tied my hair back in severe buns, as if making myself less visible would somehow make the accusations stop. That's what blame does to you. It convinces you that you're the author of someone else's cruelty. For months, I lived in this weird purgatory where I was being accused of something I hadn't done, while my actual husband was barely speaking to me except to tell me we needed more milk or that he'd be home late again. Our life had become this hollow thing, this performance we were both putting on for nobody's benefit. The dinners I cooked went cold while I waited for him. The bed I made stayed pristine on his side because he'd come to bed hours after me and leave before I woke up. We were roommates at best, strangers at worst, going through the motions of a marriage that had died somewhere along the way without either of us acknowledging the funeral. I kept thinking it was the stress. Mark's company had gone through layoffs the year before, and even though he'd kept his job, the atmosphere there had changed. He'd come home tense, anxious, watching his phone like it might deliver either salvation or catastrophe at any moment. He was different, distant. I told myself this was normal, that marriages go through phases, that we just needed to ride it out. I bought books about rekindling romance, about communication strategies, about keeping the spark alive after 20-plus years. I read them cover to cover, highlighted passages, tried to implement the suggestions. I planned date nights that he canceled. I suggested couples therapy that he dismissed. I initiated conversations about our future that he shut down with monosyllabic responses. I justified everything. The late nights, the password on his phone that hadn't been there before, the way he flinched when I touched him unexpectedly, like my hand on his shoulder was an assault rather than affection. I built these elaborate explanations in my head, these narratives where all of this made sense and we were still okay, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. Looking back now, I can see how much of myself I lost during those years. Not just the last few months with Linda's accusations, but the whole slow erosion that had been happening for longer than I wanted to admit. I used to paint. Did I mention that? I used to have this whole setup in the spare bedroom, canvases and brushes and this beautiful chaos of color. I'd spend hours in there, losing myself in the work, emerging with paint under my fingernails and in my hair, and feeling more alive than I did anywhere else. I'd had an exhibition once at a small gallery in downtown Phoenix. It wasn't the MoMA, but 12 of my paintings had hung on those walls, and 3 of them had sold. I remembered standing there on opening night, sipping cheap wine from plastic cups, watching people study my work, and feeling like I mattered, like I was more than just somebody's wife. But somewhere along the way, the spare bedroom became Mark's home office. Then it became storage. Then it became this place I didn't even go into anymore, because it reminded me of who I used to be. My canvases were stacked in the back of the closet, covered in dust. My brushes had hardened with dried paint. My dreams had been packed away like outgrown clothes. I sacrificed my identity bit by bit, trading pieces of myself for the illusion of a stable marriage. I became the perfect wife, the one who never complained, who always had dinner ready, who smiled at parties even when I wanted to scream. I became the dependable neighbor, the one everyone could count on, the one who baked brownies for birthdays, even though apparently that made me a husband, stealing whore. I became a ghost in my own life. And the worst part? I didn't even realize it was happening. That's how insidious it is, this slow dissolution of self. You don't wake up one day and decide to stop being who you are. It happens in tiny increments, small concessions, little compromises that don't seem like a big deal, until suddenly you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back. My mother used to tell me that you can't pour from an empty cup. I never really understood what she meant until I was standing at my kitchen sink one morning, staring at my reflection in the window, realizing I had nothing left to give because I'd given it all away. She'd been dead for 5 years by then, cancer taking her in 6 brutal months. But I could still hear her voice sometimes, especially when I was alone. "Don't make yourself small for a man," she'd told me once. We'd been having lunch, just the 2 of us, and she'd seen something in my face that I thought I'd hidden. Not even for love, especially not for love. I wish I'd listened. The accusations from Linda continued. She told people at the grocery store that I'd been sending inappropriate texts to Tom. She filed a noise complaint about me, claiming I was having loud parties at 2 a.m, when in reality I'd been asleep in my bed, alone, because Mark was, quote-unquote, working late. Again, the HOA sent me a letter about the noise complaint. Official letterhead, demanding I explain my disruptive behavior. I'd sat in my silent house, this letter in my hands, and laughed until I cried. Or maybe I cried until I laughed. The line between the two had gotten blurry. I stopped going to neighborhood events, stopped checking the mail when I knew she might be outside, started timing my trips to take out the trash for when I knew she'd be at her Pilates class. I mapped out her schedule like a spy planning a mission, knowing that Tuesdays and Thursdays were Pilates, Mondays and Wednesdays were her volunteer shift at the library, weekends were hit or miss. I became a prisoner in my own home. And through all of it, Mark offered nothing. No support, no defense, no outrage on my behalf. Just that same tired refrain. Ignore her. She's going through something. One evening, I'd been particularly upset. Linda had cornered Patricia at the mailboxes and told her I'd been making threatening phone calls to Tom's office. Patricia had called me, voice apologetic but firm, suggesting maybe I should seek help. Help for what? I demanded. For something I'm not doing? I'm just saying, maybe you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you're not remembering things clearly. That conversation had sent me spiraling. Was I losing my mind? Was I doing things I didn't remember? Could Linda somehow be right? I'd gone to Mark that night, needing reassurance, needing him to tell me I wasn't crazy. He'd been in the garage, as always, sitting in an old lawn chair, beer in hand, staring at nothing. "Mark, I need to talk to you." He'd sighed, the kind of heavy, put-upon sigh that made it clear he found my very existence exhausting. "What now?" "Linda's telling people I'm calling Tom's office, making threats, and people are believing her. Patricia thinks I need therapy. Maybe you do." The words had hit me like a physical blow. I'd actually stumbled backward, hand on the doorframe to steady myself. "What?" "Maybe you do need therapy. You're obsessing over this neighbor thing. It's not healthy." "I'm obsessing? She's the one spreading lies about me." "Are they lies, though?" He'd looked at me then, really looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before, something cold. "Or are you just not remembering things the way they happened?" That's when I should have known. That's when I should have put it together. But the human mind is a remarkable thing when it comes to self-protection. It will create any narrative, believe any lie, to avoid facing an unbearable truth. If I'd been paying attention, if I hadn't been so committed to my own delusion, I would have asked myself why he was so unconcerned about another woman's obsessive accusations toward his wife. I would have wondered why he never once suggested we confront Tom and Linda together, or why he seemed almost relieved when I stopped going to neighborhood functions. But I didn't ask those questions, because asking them would have meant facing answers I wasn't ready to hear. Instead, I kept shrinking, kept disappearing, kept pretending that if I just made myself small enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, everything would somehow go back to normal. Whatever normal meant anymore. I remember one night, probably 2 months before everything came crashing down, I made Mark's favorite dinner. Pot roast with all the fixings, the recipe his mother had taught me when we first got married. I'd spent hours on it, slow cooking the meat until it fell apart at the touch of a fork, roasting vegetables with herbs from the garden I'd neglected, but somehow still produced. I set the table with the good china, the set we'd gotten as a wedding gift and rarely used. I lit candles, even put on a dress instead of my usual jeans and sweater. A blue dress that Mark had once said brought out my eyes. I'd found it in the back of my closet, tags still on, purchased for some occasion that had never materialized. I'd put on makeup for the first time in weeks, styled my hair. I'd looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back, all dressed up with nowhere to go except her own kitchen table. He came home at 9:30. The food was cold. The candles had burned down to nubs, wax dripping onto my grandmother's lace tablecloth. "Sorry," he said, not looking at me. "Got stuck at the office." He smelled like lavender, that expensive lavender soap Linda always used, the one she'd once told me she ordered special from some boutique in Scottsdale. She'd been very particular about it, mentioning the brand name multiple times, how hard it was to find, how it was worth the expense because it made her feel luxurious. The scent hit me like a truck. Lavender and something else, something musky and wrong. The smell of my husband coming home, smelling like another woman. But I didn't say anything. I just reheated the pot roast and watched him eat in silence, his phone face down on the table, and I wondered when exactly our life had become this. When had we stopped talking? When had we stopped looking at each other? When had we become these hollow shells of people, going through motions that had lost all meaning? His phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times. He didn't reach for it, which was somehow more suspicious than if he had. He kept his eyes on his plate, mechanically raising fork to mouth, chewing, swallowing, never once meeting my gaze. "How was work?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Fine." "Busy day?" "Yeah." "What were you working on?" He paused mid-chew, finally looked at me. "Why all the questions?" "I'm just trying to have a conversation with my husband." "Well, maybe I don't feel like talking about work when I get home. Did you ever think of that?" I should have pushed, should have demanded answers, Should have grabbed that phone and looked at whatever was making it buzz with such desperate persistence. But I didn't. I just cleared the plates in silence and went to bed alone. The thing about sacrificing yourself for a marriage is that eventually there's nothing left to sacrifice. You've given everything, your time, your energy, your dreams, your identity, and you're standing there empty-handed, wondering what else they want from you. The answer, I learned, is that they don't want anything from you. They never did. They just wanted you out of the way. It happened on a Tuesday. That's the kind of detail that sticks with you, even though it doesn't really matter what day of the week it was. I'd been feeling off all morning, this weird pressure in my head, like my skull was too tight. I chalked it up to stress, to Linda's latest accusation that I'd been leaving threatening notes on her car, which was absurd because I hadn't been within 10 feet of her car in months. I'd been trying to reach a coffee mug from the top shelf. We'd reorganized the kitchen cabinets a few months ago, or rather, I'd reorganized them while Mark was in the garage, and I'd put the good mugs up high because we never used them anymore. But that morning, I'd wanted one. Wanted to feel like I deserved nice things, even if it was just a cup of coffee. I was in the kitchen, reaching for that glass, stretching on my tiptoes, when the room tilted sideways. My left arm went numb, the sensation draining out of it like water down a drain. The mug slipped from my fingers and shattered on the counter. My face felt strange, like someone had injected Novocaine into one side of it, pulling my mouth down, making my eye droop. I tried to speak, but the words came out garbled, nonsensical. My tongue felt thick, useless. I tried to say, help, but it came out as, huh, a sound more animal than human. I was having a stroke. A mini-stroke, the doctors would later call it, like adding mini somehow made it less terrifying. But in that moment, falling to the floor of my kitchen, unable to call for help, all I could think was, this is how I die. Alone on the kitchen floor in a house that hasn't felt like a home in years, while my husband is God knows where doing God knows what. I managed to pull my phone from my pocket, thank God I'd had it on me, and somehow, with fingers that barely worked, I dialed 911. The operator's voice sounded far away, like she was calling from another dimension. 911, what's your emergency? Ma'am, I can't understand you. Are you having trouble speaking? I made a sound of assent, or what I hoped was assent. Are you alone? Another sound. Stay on the line with me. I'm sending help to your location now. I don't remember much of the ambulance ride. Flashes of light, voices asking me questions I couldn't answer, the ceiling of the ER passing overhead like a film reel, someone putting an oxygen mask on my face, the sharp smell of antiseptic, the beeping of monitors that seemed to be keeping time with my racing heart. When I could finally speak again, when the clot-busting drugs had done their work and I was lying in a hospital bed with monitors beeping around me, the first thing I asked for was Mark. "We've been trying to reach him," the nurse said gently. She was young, kind eyes, hand warm on my arm. "His phone keeps going to voicemail. Is there anyone else we can call?" It was 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. He should have been at work. His work number should have been easy to find. They had a main line, a receptionist, a directory. He'd worked there for 15 years, but they couldn't reach him. The nurse tried his cell phone 4 more times while I lay there, watching her face grow increasingly uncomfortable. She tried his office. She even tried calling his boss, whose number I'd had saved in my phone under emergencies. His boss hadn't seen him all day, said Mark had called in sick that morning. Sick. Lying in that hospital bed, half my face still not working right, I felt something inside me crack. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper. Something fundamental. My husband had called in sick, turned off his phone, and disappeared while I'd nearly died alone on our kitchen floor. I later read something that stuck with me, burned itself into my brain like a brand. A study analyzed 25 cases of women murdered by their partners, and every single one had experienced coercive control beforehand. All of them. 100%. And suddenly I was looking at my life through this new lens, seeing patterns I'd been trained not to see. The isolation, the gaslighting, the way Mark had slowly convinced me that my instincts were wrong, that my concerns were paranoia, that I was the problem. The way he'd undermined my confidence, questioned my memory, made me doubt my own sanity. That wasn't love, that was control. And lying there in that hospital bed, unable to move properly, unable to speak clearly, I realized I'd been living in a prison I'd helped build. Brick by brick, compromise by compromise, I'd walled myself in. Mark finally showed up around 6 p.m., his hair damp like he'd just showered. He smelled like that lavender soap again, the scent so strong it made my stomach turn. He apologized, said he'd been in a meeting and his phone had died, and did I really have to scare him like that? Did I have to scare him? Like my stroke was something I'd done to him. Like my medical emergency was an inconvenience, an attack, a deliberate act designed to disrupt his day. I looked at his face, this face I'd been waking up next to for 23 years, and I saw a stranger. Or maybe I saw clearly for the first time. The slight annoyance around his eyes, the way he kept checking his phone, even though he claimed it had been dead. The way he stood just a little too far from my bed, like my condition might be contagious. "Where were you?" I asked. My words were slurred, but understandable. "I told you. Meeting. Phone died. You called in sick." A flicker of something crossed his face. Surprise, fear. I felt better. Decided to go in after all. Must have forgotten to tell them. The lie was so transparent I almost laughed. "You smell like lavender." He stiffened, just for a second, but I caught it. "They have fancy soap in the bathroom at work now. You know how they're always trying to seem upscale." Lie. I knew it was a lie. I could see it in his eyes, in the way he couldn't quite hold my gaze, in the tiny muscle twitching at the corner of his mouth. The same tell he'd had for years when he lied about small things. Whether he'd remembered to pay a bill, whether he'd eaten the last cookie, whether he'd seen the message I'd left him. But I didn't call him on it. Not then. Because even after everything, even after the stroke and the fog lifting and the sudden clarity about how much danger I'd been in, I still wasn't ready. Isn't that pathetic? I'm lying in a hospital bed, half my face not working right, and I'm still protecting him. Still making excuses. Still too afraid to name what I knew was true. Research shows that victims try to leave an average of 7 times before they finally succeed. 7 times. I'd read that somewhere, maybe in a magazine in a doctor's waiting room, and I'd thought it was about other women. Women who were different from me, women in different circumstances. I never thought I was the victim in that statistic, but I was. I'd left him in my mind 100 times, packed mental suitcases, rehearsed mental speeches, planned mental exits, but I'd never actually moved. Never actually packed a real suitcase or said a real word or walked toward a real door, because leaving meant admitting it was all real, and I wasn't ready for that yet. The doctors kept me overnight for observation. Mark went home around 9, said he'd be back in the morning. He kissed my forehead, a perfunctory gesture, his lips barely touching my skin, and left. I watched him walk down the hospital corridor, his phone already at his ear before he'd even turned the corner, and I let myself think the thoughts I'd been avoiding. He was having an affair with Linda. That's why she was accusing me of sleeping with Tom, because she was sleeping with my husband and needed to create a smokescreen, a distraction, a reason for people to look at me instead of her. It was classic projection, the kind of thing I'd read about in psychology textbooks back in college, but never thought I'd experience firsthand. It was so obvious I wanted to laugh, or cry, or both, All those late nights, all those showers when he came home, all those times he'd defended her crazy accusations with that bland, unbothered tone. The way he'd suggest I was the one with the problem, that maybe I needed therapy, that maybe I wasn't remembering things correctly. He was protecting her, and I'd been too paralyzed by my own fear of change to see it. I spent that whole night in the hospital thinking about my life, taking inventory of what I'd become. The stroke had been a warning, my body literally shutting down from the stress of living a lie. If I didn't change something, if I didn't find the courage to face the truth, the next one might kill me. The nurse who checked on me around midnight was older, grandmotherly, with kind eyes that had seen too much. "Can't sleep?" she asked, adjusting my IV. "Too much to think about." She nodded, pulling up a chair. "I shouldn't tell you this, but your husband, the way he acted when he came in? My ex-husband used to act the same way, annoyed when I was sick, put out when I needed him." I looked at her, tears suddenly hot in my eyes. "Left him after 35 years, she continued. "Best decision I ever made. You know what I learned? A stroke can be a gift." A gift? A wake-up call. Your body telling you that the life you're living is killing you. The question is, are you going to listen? I thought about my mother, dead now for 5 years, and what she would say if she could see me like this. She'd always been so strong, so certain of herself. She never would have let herself disappear the way I had. She'd given me a vase once, this beautiful antique thing that had been in our family for generations. Hand-painted porcelain from some artisan in Italy, worth more for its sentimental value than its monetary one, though it was worth plenty of both. The painting depicted a phoenix rising from flames, intricate detail work in blues and golds that caught the light. "This has been passed down through 5 generations of women in our family," she'd told me when she gave it to me, her hands already shaking from the cancer that would kill her. "All of us survivors, all of us stronger than we thought we were. Now, it's yours." I'd kept it on the mantel in our living room, this symbol of my heritage, my history, proof that I came from somewhere and someone, proof that I came from a line of strong women who survived. When I got home from the hospital the next day, the vase was gone. Just gone. I stood in front of the mantel, staring at the empty space, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. There was a dust outline where it had been, the shape of its base perfectly preserved in the thin layer of dust I'd been too tired to clean. I asked Mark about it, and he got defensive, his shoulders tensing, his voice sharp. "I knocked it over while cleaning," he said. "You were cleaning?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Mark hadn't cleaned anything in our house in years. "Yes, I was cleaning. Is that so hard to believe? You were in the hospital. I was trying to help. Where are the pieces?" "I threw them away." "You threw away my mother's vase? You didn't think to save the pieces? To see if it could be repaired?" "It was just a vase," he said. "Just a vase. My mother's vase. My grandmother's vase, my great-grandmother's vase, 5 generations of women who'd survived things I couldn't imagine, and he'd thrown it away like trash. Just a vase. Something in me broke right then, shattered just like that porcelain. I stood there in my living room, looking at the empty space on the mantel where proof of my existence used to be. And I understood. This was it. This was my collapse. The moment where I either gave up completely or fought back. I chose to fight. But I knew I couldn't do it alone. I was too weak, too conditioned to doubt myself, too trained to accept his explanations even when they made no sense. I needed help. And help came from the most unexpected place. My granddaughter Sophie came to visit that weekend. She was 12, sharp as a tack, and already more observant than most adults I knew. Mark and I didn't have kids of our own, one of those things we decided early in our marriage and never revisited. But Sophie was my brother's daughter, and she'd always had a special place in my heart. She was everything I'd once been. creative, confident, unafraid to speak her mind. She painted, wrote stories, played 3 instruments. She hadn't learned yet to make herself small for anyone. She took one look at me and knew something was wrong. "Grandma," she said, "why do you look so sad all the time?" We were sitting on the back patio, drinking lemonade, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and pink. Mark was in the garage, again, always. "I don't look sad," I said automatically. "Yes, you do. You look like how my friend Emma looked when her parents were getting divorced. Like you're trying really hard to hold something together that's already broken." Kids, they just say it, don't they? No filter, no politeness, just raw observation. "Things are just a little complicated right now," I said. "Because of Grandpa Mark and the lady next door?" My heart stopped. "What?" Sophie shrugged, slurping her lemonade like she hadn't just dropped a bomb into my lap. "I saw them kissing once, in her backyard. I was looking for the cat, and I saw them through the fence." The world tilted again, just like it had when I'd had the stroke. But this time it was different. This time it was clarity, not confusion. This time it was confirmation, not catastrophe. "When?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "I don't know. A few months ago? Last time I visited, maybe in March? I thought you knew. I thought maybe you guys had one of those open marriages like they talk about on TV." I wanted to laugh and cry and scream all at once. My 12-year-old granddaughter had known. A child had seen what I'd been too afraid to see. "Sophie," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level, "did you tell anyone else about this?" "No. I thought I'd get in trouble for spying. And also, I wasn't sure if it was a secret or not. Like, adults have weird rules about stuff." "You're not in trouble, honey, but I need you to tell me exactly what you saw, everything you remember." She did, in perfect, horrifying detail. How Mark had come out of our garage and gone over to Linda's backyard through the gate we shared. How Linda had been there in her bathing suit, one of those expensive designer ones she was always posting about on Facebook. How they'd kissed, and it wasn't like a friend kiss or a cheek kiss, it was like a movie kiss, the kind that makes you uncomfortable to watch. How he'd picked her up. How she'd wrapped her legs around him. How they'd stumbled toward her back door, laughing, his hands all over her. How they'd gone inside together, into her house. While I'd been inside our house, probably making dinner or doing laundry or existing in my carefully constructed delusion. "They were in there for like 2 hours, Sophie added. "I know because I kept checking, because I was worried the cat might be stuck somewhere, and I wanted to go look, but they were still in there. 2 hours in the middle of the day, while I was 10 feet away, separated only by a wall and my own willful blindness." "Are you going to divorce him?" Sophie asked, her voice matter-of-fact, like she was asking about the weather. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But thank you for telling me." She hugged me then, this fierce 12-year-old hug that felt like she was trying to hold me together physically, and I realized I'd been getting my strength from the wrong places all along. I didn't need Mark to validate me. I didn't need Linda's approval or the neighbor's good opinion or anyone else's permission to know my own truth. I just needed someone to believe me. And Sophie did. That night, after she'd gone home, I started digging. Not confronting, not yet. Just quietly, carefully gathering evidence. Like a detective in my own life, I began documenting everything. I checked our credit card statements, going back months, printing out each one and highlighting suspicious charges. Restaurants I'd never been to, always charged during times Mark claimed to be working late. Hotels in Phoenix when Mark was supposedly on business trips to Tucson. Why would you need a hotel in your own city? Purchases at stores Linda liked. That boutique in Scottsdale where she got her soap. A jewelry store that I'd never received gifts from. Charges at the spa where Linda got her weekly massages. I found a pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, charges at the same hotel, the Phoenician. A 5-star resort, 20 minutes from our house. Room service charges, bottle service. Charges that lined up perfectly with Mark's late nights at the office. I looked through his phone while he was in the shower. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice. I'd never snooped before. Had always prided myself on trusting my husband, on respecting his privacy, but that version of me was dead. The woman who trusted was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who needed proof. I found text messages he'd forgotten to delete, buried in a thread under her contact name, which he'd changed to Tom. Clever, making it look like he was texting her husband rather than her. But the messages were anything but neighborly. Can't wait to see you Tuesday. I've been thinking about you all day. Last night was incredible. You're incredible. I hate that I have to go home to her. I wish I could just stay with you. Plans to meet up, inside jokes I wasn't part of, references to things they'd done together. Photos I couldn't bring myself to look at for more than a second before my vision blurred with tears. I found everything. All the evidence I'd been too afraid to look for, all the confirmation of what some part of me had known for months. And then I realized I wasn't alone in this. Over the next few weeks, I started reaching out. Carefully at first, tentatively. I'd been so isolated for so long that I'd forgotten how to connect with people. But I started with Janet, who'd seemed uncomfortable when she'd told me about Linda's accusations. "Can we have coffee?" I'd asked. "I need to talk to someone." She'd agreed, and over lattes at the local coffee shop, I'd told her everything. Not as a victim looking for pity, but as someone looking for allies, looking for truth. "I knew something was off," Janet had said, her eyes wide. "The way Linda talked about you, it was so vicious, so specific. I thought maybe she was projecting." "You know anyone else who might have suspicions? Other women who've been through something similar?" That's how I found out about Margaret 3 houses down, whose ex-husband had hidden assets and run up debt in her name. About Patricia across the street, who'd discovered her husband had a whole second family in Tucson, actually maintained 2 completely separate lives for 7 years. About Anna at the end of the block, who'd been emotionally abused for so long she'd forgotten what her own opinion sounded like. We started meeting for coffee, then wine, then actual strategy sessions. The first official meeting of what would become the Phoenix Rising Group was in Margaret's living room on a Wednesday night. 6 of us, ranging in age from 35 to 68, all at different stages of recognizing, escaping, or recovering from various forms of betrayal and abuse. Margaret, tall and elegant at 60, her silver hair cut in a sharp bob, opened the meeting. "I think we all know why we're here. We've all been made to feel crazy by people who claim to love us. We've all been gaslit, manipulated, lied to, and we're done being silent about it." We went around the circle, each woman telling her story. Patricia, who'd found out about her husband's second family when his other wife showed up at her door, pregnant, asking if she knew where their husband was. Anna, whose husband had controlled every aspect of her life for 15 years, what she wore, who she talked to, what she ate, until she'd finally escaped to a women's shelter with nothing but the clothes on her back. Rachel, the youngest of us, who'd discovered her fiancé had been catfishing her with a fake identity for the first 6 months of their relationship, lying about his job, his education, his entire background. Nina, who'd survived financial abuse so severe she'd ended up bankrupt and homeless, her ex-husband having drained their accounts and destroyed her credit. And then it was my turn. I told them everything. About Linda's accusations, about Mark's affair, about the stroke, about the vase, about Sophie seeing them together, about feeling like I was disappearing, like I was going crazy, like I was the problem. "You're not the problem," Margaret said firmly. "You never were, and now we're going to help you prove it." We shared our stories, our resources, our lawyers' names and accountants' numbers and therapists' recommendations. We became a network, a support system, proof that we weren't crazy and we weren't alone, and we deserved better than what we'd been accepting. Margaret taught me about forensic accounting, how to trace hidden money, how to protect myself financially before filing for divorce. Patricia shared the name of her PI, a woman named Diane who specialized in documenting infidelity. Anna, who'd gone back to school and become a therapist herself, helped me recognize the patterns of coercive control I'd been experiencing. I learned things in those meetings that I should have known all along. How to protect my assets, opening a separate bank account in my name only, moving half of our savings before Mark could hide it. How to document everything. I bought a small notebook and started recording every interaction, every lie, every suspicious charge. How to build a case, not just for divorce, but for my own sanity. We called ourselves the Phoenix Rising Group, which was a little on the nose but made us feel powerful. The phoenix from the ashes. Women who'd been burned but were rising again. And I felt powerful. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt like I had agency, like I had control over my own story. Nina taught me about digital forensics. If he's having an affair, there's always a digital trail. Always. People get lazy, they think they're being careful, but they always slip up. She showed me how to check deleted messages, how to access cloud backups, how to see location history. Mark had an iPhone, and he'd never bothered to change the iCloud password from the one we'd set up together years ago. I found photos, videos, months of documentation of their affair, automatically backed up to the cloud, sitting there waiting for me to discover them. Linda in our bed. Linda in our bathtub. Linda wearing my robe, drinking from my coffee mugs, existing in my space like she belonged there. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. White-hot and clarifying, burning away any remaining doubt or hesitation. I started planning my confrontation. Not an emotional outburst, not a tearful accusation, but a methodical, documented exposure of everything I'd discovered. But I wanted to do it in his territory. In the garage where he hid from me, surrounded by his tools and his projects and his secrets. I wanted him to feel as trapped as he'd made me feel. I spent weeks preparing, making copies of documents, triple copies actually, one set at home, one in a safety deposit box I'd opened in my name only, one with my lawyer, moving money into accounts he didn't know about, following Margaret's detailed instructions about how to protect myself, consulting with lawyers, building my case, planning my exit strategy, all while pretending everything was normal, smiling at breakfast, asking about his day, playing the role of the oblivious wife. It was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. I'd found my power again, and I wasn't giving it back. The women in my group helped me rehearse. We role-played the confrontation, with Margaret playing Mark, anticipating his defenses, his excuses, his attempts to turn it around on me. "He's going to try to gaslight you," Anna warned. "He's going to say you're misunderstanding the evidence, that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation. He's going to try to make you feel guilty," Patricia added, "like you snooping is worse than him cheating." "Stand firm," Margaret said. "You have the truth. You have the evidence. Don't let him take that from you." The night I finally confronted him, I'd planned everything down to the minute. I waited until he went to the garage after dinner, 9:07 p.m., like clockwork. Same as every night. Then I followed him out there with a folder full of printed evidence. He looked up from whatever he was pretending to work on, surprised to see me. I never came to the garage. It was his space, his sanctuary from our marriage, from me. "We need to talk," I said. "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something." "No, it can't wait." I put the folder down on his workbench and opened it. Credit card statements with charges highlighted in yellow. Phone records with Linda's number circled in red. Printed text messages, the words damning and indefensible. Screenshots of photos from his iCloud. A timeline I'd created of every late night at work that coincided with Linda's husband being out of town. Every hotel charge. Every restaurant. Every lie. I watched the color drain from his face. It happened in stages, First confusion, then recognition, then fear. His face went from tan to pale to almost gray, and his hand trembled as he reached for the folder. "What is this?" he asked, but his voice was already defeated. He knew what it was. He knew he'd been caught. "This is the end," I said, and my voice didn't shake. I'd practiced this, rehearsed it with my group until I could say it without crying, without wavering. "The end of your lies, the end of your manipulation, the end of our marriage." "Wait, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. I know about Linda. I know about the bathtub, Mark, our bathtub. The one with the chipped tile I've been asking you to fix for 2 years. The one you were apparently too busy to fix because you were using it to fuck our neighbor." He actually flinched at my language. In 23 years of marriage, I'd rarely sworn. The perfect wife didn't use crude language. But the perfect wife was dead. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that I know, and so will everyone else." "You're not going to tell people." "Why not?" "Because it would be embarrassing for you." I laughed. Actually laughed, the sound echoing in the garage, bouncing off his perfectly organized tools and his carefully maintained facade. "Embarrassing for me? Mark, you're the one who's been screwing our neighbor while her husband was out of town. You're the one who's been letting her accuse me of having an affair with her husband to cover up your own affair with her. You're the one who's been gaslighting me for months, making me think I was crazy, making me doubt my own sanity. I never meant for it to happen. I don't care about your intentions. I care about your actions, and your actions have consequences." He tried pleading then. Tried explaining how it had started innocently, how Linda had been having problems with Tom, how he'd just been trying to help, how one thing led to another, how it didn't mean anything, how I was the one he really loved, how we could work through this. The same tired script every cheater uses, like there was a handbook somewhere. What to say when you get caught. "She was vulnerable," he said. "She needed someone to talk to." "So you talked to her in our bathtub? You talked to her in hotels you charged to our credit card?" "It was a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to buy milk. A mistake is bouncing a check. This was a choice. Hundreds of choices. Every time you lied to me, every time you made me doubt myself, every time you let her accuse me while you were the one doing exactly what she said I was doing. Those were choices." "Please," he said, and there were actually tears in his eyes. "Please don't do this. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll end it with Linda. I'll do whatever you want." "What I want is a divorce." The word hung in the air between us, final and irrevocable. I'd heard enough. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, "and I'm telling everyone exactly why. Linda, Tom, the whole neighborhood, your boss, your family, everyone. You can't do that. Watch me." And I did. God help me, I did. I told Tom first, sent him copies of all the evidence, the text messages, the timeline, the photos, everything. Emailed it to him at his work address at 7 a.m. the next morning with a simple subject line: "The truth about Linda and Mark." Told him I was sorry he had to find out this way, but he deserved to know the truth. He called me the next day, voice broken, actually sobbing on the phone, thanking me. Said he'd suspected something, but Linda had convinced him he was paranoid, jealous, controlling. She'd been gaslighting him too, using the same playbook Mark had used on me. "She told me I was imagining things," he said, "that I was being abusive by not trusting her, that I needed therapy for my jealousy issues." We compared notes, realized they'd been playing us against each other for months, using our confusion and doubt to create space for their affair. When Tom had been out of town for work, they'd told us both they were busy with other things. When Linda had her Pilates classes, she'd actually been at hotels with Mark. When Mark had his late nights at the office, he'd been with Linda. It was calculated, deliberate, cruel. They'd weaponized our trust against us. Then I told the neighbors, posted on our neighborhood Facebook group with a simple message: For everyone who's been hearing Linda's accusations about me and Tom, I wanted to share the truth. Attached the evidence. Pressed send. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started buzzing within minutes. Texts, calls, comments on the post, flooding in faster than I could read them. Some people defended Mark and Linda, said I was being vindictive, said private matters should stay private, that I was classless for airing dirty laundry. But most people were horrified, supportive, angry on my behalf. Janet commented, "I'm so sorry. I should have trusted my instincts." Patricia, "I've been through something similar. If you need anything, I'm here." Even Mrs. Chen, who barely used Facebook and certainly didn't comment on drama, wrote, "You are a brave woman." What they did was shameful. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and Mark and Linda were guilty. The HOA president, a stern woman named Deborah, who'd always intimidated me, called me directly. "I owe you an apology. Linda brought those accusations to our meetings, and I believed her. I should have investigated before allowing her to damage your reputation." Linda moved out within 2 weeks. Tom filed for divorce. Their house went up for sale, a for sale sign appearing in the yard like a scarlet letter, everyone in the neighborhood knowing exactly why. I'd see her sometimes, loading boxes into her car, her perfect yoga body hunched and defeated. She never looked at me, never tried to explain or apologize or defend herself. She just disappeared, bit by bit, until one day there was a moving truck, and then she was gone. Mark tried to convince me to stop, said I'd made my point, said we could work through this if I just stopped publicly humiliating him. He showed up at the house, I'd changed the locks, and he'd had to use his key, only to find it didn't work anymore, and banged on the door until I threatened to call the police. "You're ruining my life," he shouted through the door. "No," I called back. "You ruined your own life. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." But this wasn't about humiliation. It was about justice, about accountability, about making sure that every woman in my neighborhood knew that staying silent was a choice, and so was speaking up. My lawyer was ruthless. Margaret had recommended her. Diane Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, a shark in a designer suit who specialized in high-asset divorces involving infidelity. "We're going to bury him," she said at our first consultation, reviewing my evidence with undisguised glee. "This is exactly the kind of documentation I need. You've done half my job for me." We documented every asset, every account, every penny. Mark had been hiding money, planning his own exit, just not the way it ended up happening. Diane found accounts I didn't know existed, investments he'd made without telling me, even a separate credit card he'd been using to fund the affair. "Arizona is a community property state," Diane explained. "Everything acquired during the marriage is split, 50-50. But we're going to argue that his dissipation of marital assets, all this money he spent on the affair, means you're entitled to more than half to compensate you for what he stole." We built a case, brick by brick. Every hotel charge became Exhibit A through Z. Every gift he'd bought Linda, jewelry, clothes, expensive dinners, became proof of dissipation. The fact that he'd used our money, our joint accounts, to finance his betrayal became the foundation of my settlement. The divorce took 6 months. 6 months of depositions and negotiations, of Mark's lawyer trying to paint me as vengeful and unreasonable, of my lawyer systematically destroying every argument they made. 6 months of Mark alternating between begging me to reconsider and threatening me with legal action. 6 months of discovering just how much of our marriage had been a lie. In the end, I got the house, half of everything we'd built together, and alimony. Mark got his garage tools and a studio apartment in a bad part of town. His lawyer had argued that he couldn't afford the alimony payments, that his reputation had been damaged, and his job was in jeopardy because of my malicious social media post. Diane had smiled sweetly and asked if Mark had considered the consequences before he committed adultery. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, was not sympathetic to his plight. Linda lost her marriage, her reputation, and had to move to a different city to escape the judgment. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to Tucson, of all places. Started over somewhere no one knew her story. And me? I got my life back. Not the life I'd had before. That was gone, and honestly, I didn't want it back anyway. But a new life. A better life. I started painting again. Turned Mark's garage into my studio, which felt poetic somehow. Where he'd hidden from me became where I found myself again. I threw out his workbench, his tools, his beer fridge, all of it. Painted the walls a bright, clean white. Installed proper lighting, north-facing windows, everything I'd dreamed of when I'd had my studio in the spare bedroom all those years ago. The first thing I painted was a shattered vase, pieced back together with gold in the Japanese tradition of kintsugi, making the broken places beautiful, making the scars part of the art. I hung it in my living room, right where my mother's vase used to sit. A reminder that broken things can be made whole again, and sometimes they're even more beautiful for having been broken. The women from my support group stayed in my life. We still meet, every other Thursday now, but it's evolved. We still share our stories and support each other through the hard days, but now we also celebrate victories, promotions and graduations and first dates and apartments signed in our own names. Patricia brought champagne the day her divorce was finalized. Anna brought a new member, a friend of hers who'd just discovered her husband's affair. Margaret announced she was writing a book about financial abuse, a guide for women who needed to protect themselves. We'd become more than a support group. We'd become a family. I went back to school, took business classes, learned about investing and financial planning. I'd spent so many years letting Mark handle everything that I'd forgotten I was perfectly capable of handling it myself. Turned out I was actually pretty good at it. Better than he'd been, actually, once I saw how much he'd lost through bad investments and worse decisions. I secured my financial future, set up retirement accounts, invested in property, built a safety net that was mine and mine alone. Bought a rental property with the settlement money, started generating passive income, planned for a future where I'd never depend on anyone else for financial security. 6 months after the divorce was final, I ran into Tom at the grocery store. We got coffee, compared notes on how we were rebuilding. He was doing okay, all things considered. Had started dating someone new, someone honest, a teacher he'd met at a bookstore. "I should thank you," he said. "I'd still be living that lie if you hadn't told me the truth." I was happy for him. We'd both been casualties of the same war, and we'd both survived. That was enough. Sometimes people ask me if I feel bad about how it all played out, about exposing Mark and Linda so publicly, about not handling it privately, discreetly, the way people say these things should be handled, and the answer is no. I don't feel bad at all, because the cost of silence is too damn high. I kept silent for years. Silent about my doubts, my fears, my intuition. Silent about the way I was disappearing. Silent about the abuse, because yes, it was abuse, even without bruises or broken bones. Coercive control is abuse. Gaslighting is abuse. Financial manipulation is abuse. Isolation is abuse. And that silence almost killed me. Literally. The stroke was my body's way of saying enough. If I'd kept quiet about the affair, if I'd handled it privately, what would that have taught me? That betrayal should be protected? That the comfort of my betrayer mattered more than my own truth? What would it have taught Linda? That she could destroy a marriage and walk away unscathed? What would it have taught the other women in my neighborhood who were suffering in silence, who needed to see that speaking up was possible? Before I end my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I wish someone had told me years ago, before I'd sacrificed so much of myself. The cost of silence in abusive relationships extends far beyond just the immediate victim. Studies show that domestic violence and coercive control have ripple effects across families, communities, and even generations. Children who witness these dynamics are significantly more likely to either become victims themselves or perpetrators in their own relationships. The patterns repeat unless someone breaks them. But here's what I learned that changed everything. Silence doesn't just enable your abuser, it enables every future victim they'll have. It enables the system that allows this behavior to continue. It enables the cultural narrative that says these things should be handled privately, quietly, shamefully. When we speak up about betrayal, manipulation, and abuse, we do several critical things. First, we validate our own experience. We stop gaslighting ourselves. We stop accepting the narrative that we're crazy or paranoid or overly sensitive. Second, we warn others. We prevent the next victim. Third, we create community. We find other people who understand, who've been there, who can help us navigate the aftermath. I found statistics that haunt me. 70% of domestic abuse victims never report what's happening to them. 70% stay silent, and of those who do report, many face disbelief, judgment, or pressure to reconcile. We live in a culture that values privacy over protection, that treats marriage as sacrosanct even when it's toxic, that blames victims for not leaving while simultaneously making it nearly impossible to leave safely. The average abuser will go on to abuse 7 more partners if they face no consequences. 7. Think about that. If I'd stayed silent, how many more women might Mark have manipulated? How many more marriages might Linda have destroyed? Speaking up isn't just about personal vindication. It's about breaking cycles. It's about creating consequences. It's about saying to the world, this behavior is not acceptable, and I will not protect you from the repercussions of your choices. I also learned about the specific tactics of coercive control, and I wish I'd known about them earlier. Things like isolation, cutting you off from friends and family, financial control, limiting your access to money or information about finances, gaslighting, making you doubt your own perceptions and memories, monitoring, tracking your movements, checking your phone, controlling your schedule. Mark did all of these things, so gradually that I didn't notice until I looked back with clear eyes. If you're reading this or hearing this and it sounds familiar, please listen. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. You're not too sensitive. These are real tactics used by real people to maintain power and control in relationships. And the most important thing I can tell you is this: you deserve better. You deserve to be believed. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to have opinions and boundaries and a life that's yours. The cost of silence is too high. It costs you your identity, your health, your future. Sometimes it costs you your life. So speak up. Tell someone. Tell everyone. Don't protect your abuser at the expense of yourself. I know it's terrifying. I know it feels like blowing up your whole life. But I promise you, staying silent is blowing up your life too. Just slower. Just quieter. Choose the explosion that leads to freedom, not the one that leads to erasure. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it was long, and I know some parts were hard to hear. But I needed to tell it all. Needed you to understand not just what happened, but how it happened. The slow accumulation of small betrayals that led to the big ones. I'm curious. What time is it where you are? What city are you in? Are you listening to this while doing dishes, driving to work, lying in bed unable to sleep? I think about that sometimes, about all of you out there, strangers who've let me into your day for this hour. If this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in any part of it, please hit that like button. Not for me, but for the algorithm. So this reaches other people who need to hear it. So it reaches someone who's right now where I was 2 years ago, convinced she's crazy, convinced she's alone. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have exposed them publicly or handled it privately? Do you think I went too far or not far enough? I read every comment, and your perspectives help me process my own story. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. I share stories like this regularly, stories of betrayal and recovery, of women who found their strength when they thought they had none left. Stories that remind us we're not alone. I'm going to suggest 2 videos you might want to watch next. The first is about financial recovery after divorce, with specific steps for protecting your assets and rebuilding your credit. The second is about recognizing red flags in relationships before you're in too deep. Both are linked in the description. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Trust your instincts. Don't let anyone convince you that your reality isn't real. And remember, a betrayal this deep doesn't just heal, it scars over. But sometimes scars are proof that you survived something that should have killed you. You're stronger than you know.